Can you go back just so I can see if Justin's on?
How's Nevada?
We're not there yet.
Oh, you're not there yet.
We are in Bishop, California.
Oh, fantastic. How's Bishop, California?
Nice, beautiful, crisp, blue sky.
Great.
Nice little chill in the air.
Wonderful. And obviously good Wi-Fi where you are.
So far.
Knock on wood. I'm knocking on wood.
No kidding.
Yeah, there's many levels to this, to do this. I am trying to set this up so that the live stream runs on our webpage. So once we have our meeting, I have to create a live stream. I have to get a link.
It's Justin. Okay. I don't have to text him. Hey there, Justin. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
And we can hear you. Hello.
Hello.
Dimitri's just getting everything ready.
I think, but we can see in a minute. So whenever we want to say good morning, or do we want to
get me
hop in?
Well, you know what? I'm gonna get me some water.
I feel like Carl is in a Soyuz space capsule.
It looks a bit like Halloween in here as well, doesn't it? Because of the poor lighting. Sorry.
You're perfectly in season.
Yes, not far off, is it? Yeah.
Wow, the gang's all here. This is great.
Getting the band back together, man.
I know.
Right, whenever you're ready, Dimitri.
Sounds much better with a British accent.
Doesn't it? Everything sounds better with a British accent.
Okay, I am. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start the broadcast, and then I might need
record.
Then hit record, and then I might need to pop off for a minute, or we might need to be off the screen while the conversation will still continue as I set up everything for the blog post on it. So I am hitting broadcast. It'll take a moment for it to happen, and we'll go from there. So let's see what happens. The live stream. I'm gonna do stuff and restart it.
Mm-hmm. Tech.
This is really a very first world problem.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Okay, so here's what we're going to do.
We're just not going to do it.
We're not going to do it. We're going to value everybody's time, and we won't be streaming. We will record it, and it'll go live. And if you on that thing want to post a little note to Twitter saying that. Are we good?
We're recording and we're good.
Alrighty then. Hi everyone, and welcome to Creating the Future's board meeting. And the giggling is that we've been trying to get online for quite a while. To any of you who wanted to watch this streaming, we apologize. There have been technical glitches, and this will be, obviously it is being recorded, and hopefully you will comment, albeit a little bit late, but we will take all of those comments into account. It is delightful to be with all of you. We haven't seen many of our faces all together in a long time, so this just feels really good. I am Hildy Gottlieb with Creating the Future, and the guy next to me is
Dimitri Petropoulos with Creating the Future.
And we're beaming in from a hotel room in Bishop, California. So if you guys want to just share who you are and where you're beaming in from, and we'll get started. Carl, how about you?
Hi, I'm Carl Wilding. I'm one of the board members. I'm beaming in from about 20 miles just outside London in England.
Nice to see you. It has been a long time.
It has. Grayer.
All of us. It's just under this. How about you, Rachel?
I'm beaming in from Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
Wonderful. And how is the weather where you are?
It's still hot, believe it or not, but at least it's not raining today. So we've had a lot of rain, so it's nice to have a little bit of sunshine now.
No kidding, no kidding. And Rebecca?
Hello, I'm beaming in from my parents' office in Boise, Idaho. I live about 2 hours north and just arrived here for today's meeting.
Yay. And Justin?
I am sitting in Washington, D.C.
And the weather?
Sun just came out. So chilly, but sunny.
Yay. How about you, Angie?
Hi, I am beaming in from Omaha, Nebraska, and the weather is sunny today and actually a perfect fall day.
Perfect. Yay. Shiva, how about you?
I'm in Lafayette, California, not far from Bishop, California. And it's a gorgeous, gorgeous day.
Wonderful.
You're on the other side of the mountain.
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, it is delightful to see everybody. It has been a while. This is actually our first board meeting of 2018. Much big stuff been happening and much to talk about today. So let us start with sharing what has been awesome in our lives. We haven't seen each other as a group. Many of us have seen each other individually, but we haven't seen each other as a group in a long time. So what has been awesome in your life? Anyone who feels like starting?
Okay, I'll start. Well, it's been a while since I've seen you guys, except Hildy. We talked a couple weeks ago, and one of the exciting things that's happening to me, and maybe together we can experience a little bit. So I'm taking over as president of ARNOVA, our Association for Research on Nonprofit Organizations and Voluntary Action. I'm taking over as the president of the board starting in November. So very exciting, and hopefully we're going to continue to have some conversations through ARNOVA about what ARNOVA can make possible for the world, for the field, and for whom. So that, and my other personal awesome is that I'm about to head to Beijing, China on Friday to give a talk. So that's pretty exciting too.
Woo! What are you talking on?
The conference is on philanthropy and commerce, and I'm talking about kind of extending some research or thinking I've been doing about how the role of marketization of and how it influences nonprofit organizations and philanthropy. And there's some work that's been done kind of arguing that commercialization, for example, is maybe good for nonprofits in China because it can create a independent space for civil society. I'm sort of arguing that maybe there's limitations to that there's opportunities for more engagement of citizens might be a better strategy for nonprofits. Of course, in an authoritarian or transitional regime, this is complicated, but those are the kinds of discussions that I hope that we have.
Yay. Yay. Well, your awesome just became my awesome. That's really pretty amazing. Wow. Who else? What's going on in your lives?
Oops, go ahead, Carl. Go ahead.
I sometimes feel that my awesome is getting to the end of the day and still being standing and so on. It feels we've had a busy old time, and Angie will probably know this better than anyone. But things are changing quite a bit in the UK at the moment, and a personal view is for the worse. But there you go. The organisation I work for, which is an umbrella body, a bit like Independent Sector. In the US, well, it's our 100th birthday next year, so we've been doing lots of sort of preparation and sort of thinking about that. And I guess that's quite an awesome thing to sort of celebrate, actually, because 100 years is a long time, and I guess one of the things that it makes me think about is that when we are thinking about the way forward and new organizational models and change, I guess it just sort of makes you think that what endures actually is that people want to do something good, and they always want to do something good. And what we've got to always sort of try and think about is what are the best ways that we can organize them so that they can make the biggest difference.
Wow. Oh, well, you looking good for 100, Carl. You don't look a day over 85, baby. How about you, Rachel? What's going on in your world?
So I have two things that I find are awesome. I finally finished the first draft of my first book, so that's pretty exciting. And the other awesome is that I used Hildy's catalytic thinking process with a client that was going through some difficult transitions, and it turned out really well. Totally changed the lens of how they viewed things through the lens of possibility rather than problem solving. So that felt really good.
Yay.
Thank you, Hildy.
Oh, I have been dying to know what happened, so that makes me happy. That makes me happy. Who else? What's going on that's awesome in your world?
I'll step in. So this week, what's awesome is I have two courses that I'm teaching. One is I was invited to speak at the University of Baltimore, Maryland, and they're doing a sort of a survey on nonprofits, and the professor asked me to come in and shake up the norms of how people think about nonprofits. So that was kind of going to be kind of fun to just pose the question of, if we want to create change, what does that take, and what does that mean about who has to be involved, and what that means about power. So that's kind of exciting. And then on Friday, I have a third session of a program that I've been doing with the local community college that's actually working again with some young nonprofit leaders, and got them last time all fired up about what it means to run an organization from a values perspective. And they started asking all sorts of great questions around, well, what does that mean when the values aren't followed? And what does that mean about culture? And how can that work? And so that was really fun. And so this next session, we're actually going to explore catalytic thinking and think about, okay, once you have a high aspiration, how do you then begin to build systems and programs around that? So very fun.
Oh, that's very fun.
And then the other thing is 2 weeks ago, I attended a course on racial equity engagement course, and that was fun. to sort of learn and give purchase to asking all sorts of questions about race and racism and its construct in America. So that's exciting but scary work too.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. That's wonderful, Justin. Rebecca, how about you?
Well, I'm here on my way closer to the Boise airport. So my awesome is that tomorrow I am flying out to Nevada, where Hildy Dimitri will be picking me up for all of the good work that's underway with the Nevada Department of Education. So that is really about what does it mean, thinking along the lines of what you shared, Justin, what does it look like if an organization is walking the talk of what they want to see and model what they expect to see out in the school districts with our youth. So, and that is with a Creating the Future fellow, Christy McGill. So I just sent a note to Justin reminding him that 5 years ago we met in immersion in Tucson with Christy and Hildy, all of us in the room. And another awesome is we're teaching several immersion courses right now, and that I'm in this room with Shiva, and then we're going to go right into catalytic listening, kicking off 15 minutes after this meeting ends with Shiva and some amazing human beings from all over the world who are continuing their exploration of the practice.
Speaking of Shiva.
So yeah, awesome. Hildy and Dimitri are coming out at the end of the week. So that's awesome. And we have what I think is some great meetings scheduled with various people in the Bay Area. So that is, I'm just so excited about seeing what possibilities are there and what can emerge. And then the other awesome is starting Catalytic Listening 102 with Rebecca and some of my fellow cohorts from the 101. And just looking forward to all the, all the stuff that I can just absorb through that. So I'm really looking forward to that. Awesome.
Yay, yay. So many of you guys' awesomes are my awesome. So how about you? What's your awesome?
We're beginning a 2-month tour with amazing possibilities. Meetings that are already scheduled that are off the charts in terms of the potential of those meetings, the people we're meeting, and it continues to evolve because literally as we speak, other meetings are being set up that we don't even know about, that we will learn about as we get to different communities. And it's also awesome that this is the 10 years ago, almost exactly now, 10 years ago, we had another tour that we were on. So it's pretty awesome to be on the road again because it creates possibility. It has always been something in my mind, and we've talked about this in our mind, we've talked about this a lot, that when you're out there, things happen. So we're out there, so things are happening.
Yeah, we're always a little out there. We're a little more out there now.
Well, things happen all the time.
Yeah, this I would have to agree, and got to see 2 out of 3 of our kids this past weekend, which was awfully nice. And because we came through LA and then coming up through the beautiful country that is the eastern border of California with Nevada. And you're sort of smack dab between Death Valley and the Sierras. And you sort of know right on the other side of the Sierras is Yosemite, which is so remarkably beautiful. And right on the other side of the mountains is Death Valley, which is so remarkably beautiful. And you're on this road, yeah, it's a beautiful part of the country. And as Rebecca noted, we are heading to Nevada to work with the Department of Education on helping them on work that is deeply meaningful to them, which is the acknowledgement that to improve education, they need to simultaneously be working with the education content and with the humans who are both delivering that content and administering that delivery and all of the umbrellas, and just looking system-wide, what does it look like when you have a culture that is about people, that is nurturing people. And it is remarkable that the entire system, the entire Department of Education is looking at those questions and the potential impact of that. So that is one of many, many awesomes. And, you know, looking out the window at this beautiful, beautiful place is another one. So
one quick add in here. We had been to Death Valley about a year ago, I think it was now. And while we were there, we got to see all these jets fly through what they call a Star Wars Canyon, where they actually do testing. And I won't get into the whole story about that. But as we were driving up the highway today, an F-35 went over the highway and headed toward Death Valley. And we looked at each other and said, we know where that plane is going. So
yeah, what they actually do is all of this stuff, all of the maneuvers that you remember from that first Star Wars, where they're going into the canyon and then they're zooming along. There's actually a canyon that Air Forces from around the world practice in.
They train in.
And you are looking down into the canyon over the top of these planes. So they are diving in and going sideways, just like they do in Star Wars, only you're up here looking down at them. It's one of the most remarkable things I've ever seen. So yeah, you know, knowing that. So, well, we have much to talk about. It has been a long time. I'm lamenting that we do not have the 990 in final form back from the accountant. I would like to take a moment or two and just talk about that logistically, what do we want? Usually we review the 990 as a group before it goes off or immediately after it getting sent off, because really the numbers don't change, just the story that it tells is changing. And so if that's something that you guys want to review at the next meeting, or we can just post it to the blog and have discussion there. I thought I would just open it up and see what all approach do you want to take? Do you think would be a good approach? You know, we know what discussing the 990 makes possible. It brings us back to some of basically we see it as a communication tool. So when we're filing the 990, the numbers are going to be the numbers. What is the story that it tells? And so I guess what do we believe it would make possible if we actually had a discussion? And what do we believe it would make possible if we blogged it? Let's just play with those two options. What does it make possible if we have the discussion versus blogging it?
So here we often have a conversation about annual reports and accounts and what works and so on. So I think I'd sort of be quite happy if you blog it, but then we have the discussion online and sort of talk about it. And the thing that I like to see in annual reports more than anything is almost sort of telling a story with the numbers, and I don't see that very often in organizations. So I think if we can model how to tell the story using numbers, I think that would be a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, several years ago, and I think it was 2013, we actually annotated the 990, and I'd love to find someone who wants to do that again. That line by line goes through and says, here's what this number means, here's why this number is here, this is why it's high, this is why it's low, really telling that story. So I think Carl, yeah. Anyone else? Justin, any thoughts on the delivery method of that discussion?
I guess I'm predisposed to the blog option. It gives a little more time for people to digest, and I think to Carl's point, to process if we feel it's telling the right story as much as it can within the confines of the IRS. But we as we noted, there's a lot of room for making sure that it has what we want it to have. So yeah, I would think just, that we commit to looking at it and reading it and making sure that it represents for us what we want it to say.
Well, I like that what the blog makes possible is time for us to slowly think and to think when we're best at thinking. So some of us are best at thinking at 5 o'clock in the morning, and some are best at thinking late at night, and et cetera. And I like what that makes possible. And
I think also,
yeah, keep going.
The blog, the reality is then it's walking our talk, and it's an invitation to the world versus, it's not just in this meeting, yes, that we broadcasted, and if people happen to choose to look at a video. So it's continuing to say, here's the 990, and here we're telling the story, and also the invitation to the questions that other people may bring up far beyond the wisdom of this collection of humans around people wanting to understand this entity, this organization, and what is being put in place toward accomplishing that 10-year mission.
Yeah. Yeah, the thought that occurs to me as you're talking, Rebecca, is it allows something that can be printed out and handed to somebody without having to say, listen to this 2-hour meeting. Yeah.
I was just going to add that for some people, when they see something written, they respond to it differently than when they're hearing the conversation.
And talk about differently, good, bad.
It's when you're reading something, you're reading it at your own pace, right? And for some people, the pace matters. Some people can listen to fast conversations going on and be on top of it. For others, they need some time to really, see it, absorb it. It's the learning. Are you a visual learner or a, auditory learner and all of that? But also I agree that it gives you time to absorb it at your own pace. And then you take notes. Having something written, you can actually take notes. Say, okay, this is what I think about this. And then you can put your thoughts together and respond to everybody that way.
Yeah. Okay, then I think we will, I'm sensing consensus that it feels best to blog this rather than come together. I haven't heard anybody talk about what would it make possible if we had the discussion live rather than blogging it, or we could do both.
Okay, I'll jump in on that one because I think, I know personally speaking for myself anyway, having a time where we come together creates accountability where I will definitely read it and be ready to discuss it, as opposed to a blog where it can sometimes get lost in the, all the other stuff. And I wanted to also, I was just thinking about, and back to Carl's point, or just thinking about 990s in general, they're very difficult to really make sense of for most people. So the 990 is required because of legal reasons, right? But otherwise, how do we, the story, whatever that is, how do we make it useful is beyond just, we don't even, the 990 is almost a side thing too, right? So we don't need to start with the 990, I guess, is what I'm saying, I think.
Yeah.
I will comment on that as well, on what it makes possible if we do have a live discussion. For me, often in my thinking, I can read it, I can make notes, but the interactive conversation creates new thinking. And Carl made a comment or suggestion. I had not thought of it from that perspective. This now gives me a different perspective. So I build on what I was thinking. So it is basically an interactive conversation that allows you to build on each other. and for me, I often find that much more powerful to be in conversation with people and to be able to build on what others are saying, or agree or disagree, or I may have a great thought that I note, and then Justin in his conversation points up some folly of my thought, or something about it that doesn't allow it to be appropriate or whatever. So frequently I find that having the opportunity to read it, and yes, Angie, the accountability to read it because you're going to go into live discussion, but that the live discussion makes things happen for me that don't happen in the I'm reading something and thinking about it and writing something down. It enriches it, and it adds a level of thinking that frequently I miss on my own.
And I'd like to point out the folly, Dimitri, in the argument that I find folly in your comments. Except in this one instance right now.
Thank you, Justin.
Well, it's honoring the different ways people learn, different ways people want to contribute, different ways people want to participate in the yes and giving that advance time to consume and explore and post questions, and the live conversation is walking the talk of what feels good to one person may not feel comfortable to another person.
In walking the talk of meeting people where they are, it feels like the most places we could have the discussion, the more we can have discussion in more places, the more we're able to meet people where they are. That it becomes a yes and, that we blog it, that we tweet it, that we however people digest it. I know, Carl, you have frequently asked about slide shares, turning it into a slide share and just being able to go, oh yeah. On the flip side of that, getting to your point, Dimitri, we won't always read all the comments at the blog. So we may read the blog post, we may zip through it and not necessarily get to all of the comments, which is where the good stuff is. And so again, what does it take? What conditions need to be in place for the conversation to be the richest it can be? And I think it needs to be meeting people where they are.
I have a slightly different take. Based on a sort of almost a philosophical discussion I was having with someone at work the other day, and I was sort of saying, well, our job is quite often is to communicate things, is to make them as simple as possible so that people can understand. And my correspondents essentially argue back, well, no, actually, some things actually are complicated, and we shouldn't try to simplify the things that are complicated, i.e. in I-90. And I guess maybe what your point about discussion is saying is that some things it is worth the time in going into detail and trying to go through the complexity of them, or else we lose something in that process of how we communicate.
Yeah. Okay. Well, is there consensus around doing both, putting it at the blog, or discussing it at the blog, and the next time we get together, having a rich conversation about it? Alrighty, and that is what we will do.
Quick question. I'm just trying to think of what our deadline for filing is.
Yeah, it's not about the filing, because the filing is the filing. The question really becomes, the numbers are the numbers, and the degree to which one is able to really tell the story is what you do with those numbers. The IRS gives you, and yeah, they give us this much, and basically what it says right now, when it is filed, there is a schedule that says, what are your accomplishments? And the program into which the accountant has to input it to send it to the IRS makes it so difficult to follow along, and it is just wretched. And so what we have always done, because we had this conversation the first year we filed an I-90, we had this beautiful conversation at the board, spent the entire meeting talking about what the 990 makes possible. And it was from that we, every year, we provide an annual report that is right now posted. Yeah, the 990 is not posted, but that report is posted from 2017 of what did we accomplish? What did we experiment with? What did we learn? And the ability to at every point in the schedule on the 990, where it says, what did you do? There's a line that says, see this, we actually include the URL. That says, click through and see what we did. Click through and see what we did. Because the 990 does make it impossible. So yeah, it's not deadline driven from the IRS. That will get filed. But it's really discussion driven of you know, in our being open with the world about having that discussion about what worked and what didn't. What did we learn? What could have gone better, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I'm just sort of flashing on, if all corporate financial reports have annotation like that, you know, we had X number in sales. What does that mean? And have it easily accessible from the actual report. Now, sales usually are broken down, but you know, how resources are being used, because that's really what the 990 does in terms of the IRS. You know, what money is coming in, what money is going out. You know, who's getting it. You know, who's in the organization, without any explanation of that. And certainly without any, not obligation, but, you know, what's your purpose? You know, what are you trying to accomplish here other than make sure you're reporting the money?
Right.
If I may add, I think filling the 990 and all those numbers are really the response of the organization to the existing system. Telling the story is a response of the organization to the community.
Beautiful, yeah. Yes. I cannot think of a better note upon which to close the discussion. Thank you, Shiva. Yeah. Let's dive in then to just doing a little bit of bringing everyone up to speed, because it has been such a long time since we've been together. I thought it might be sort of just fun and instructive and a little bit celebratory to talk about what we've been doing this year. And you all received a 273-page document of what we've been doing this year. What stood out to you all in the work that we're doing? As you looked through everything that Creating the Future is working on right now and has been working on for the year, what highlights stood out to you? What questions arose for you?
A highlight for me was just a deep appreciation and gratitude for increased accessibility. There are more ways for people to come in contact with, to learn about catalytic thinking and decision making. So I think on the education front, the push to remove barriers to people experiencing and learning. I saw, you know, very, very significant strides in that, and I'm very pleased with that.
It feels great. It feels great. Rachel was part of the beta that we did earlier this year in a new, again, making it more accessible. Any observations you had, Rachel, just being part of that? And you're muted, just to make sure that you unmute.
Absolutely, Hildy. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to be part of that beta. It was life-altering. You know, coming from a third world country, culturally, my life experience has been to approach decisions through problem solving rather than what's possible, simply because there was never enough resources to do even a minimum. And so I didn't realize how much that lens shaped even the way I approach engagements with clients now. And so that class came at the right time for me. It just blew my mind. I thought, well, yeah, why don't we think this way? And, what would it take to make people think this way? And so when you offered the deep dive, and I said, Hildy, it's the end of the year and I'm a fundraiser. I don't want to miss out, but it's not good timing. I was thrilled that you're going to offer it again, because I think that really it is the key to transformation. We have to empower people to think differently if we want different results. And it seems like a very uphill climb in this climate, and it was the one bright spark of encouragement.
Yay. Yay. Well, and one of the things that is wonderful to hear in your description, Rachel, is that came through in our doing it in a very different way than we've taught it before. So the fact that you got that out of it from primarily recorded classes and a little bit of discussion, that is wonderful to hear. So thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else that stood out to you all as you were looking through our accomplishments this year, or any questions that arose?
So two things sort of stick out when I read it again. The first is that 600 consultants on the Facebook group, at the risk of focusing on a big number, that's a substantial and broad community of practice, and that feels like a springboard or a basis for action. So well done on that. I think that's really good. And then the second observation I will make is that in my life, community creating the future, it's one of those sort of slightly out there bits of my life. It's a bit distant from from what I think of as the center of orthodoxy or the center of practice. So when I saw that the Nevada Department of Education was working with you, I thought that felt quite important, because for a statutory body to recognize what you're doing and want to work with you, I just wondered if that was a thing. If that was a sign of the mainstreaming of some of your thinking. So I thought that was notable and worthwhile.
We hope so. We hope so. When it is one of the exciting things about this tour that we are embarking upon, is the more people experience, even just for sitting in a lecture hall for an hour, experience a different way of thinking. The more people experience that, the more I can go, oh yeah, and I can ask those questions. I mean, one of the most exciting things was when people started to say, I can ask those questions. It's not just in my work. I can ask those questions of my husband. And it was like the light bulbs go off. It's like, wow, I can make things possible at home. So yeah, that feels great. Thank you, Carl.
One thing I'll add, just in the Nevada Department of Education, is this is our opportunity to experiment with cohorts of people in the same workplace systems. So, and this has been growing. We've taught multiple cohorts in Nevada before, and now we have folks who are in the various departments in NDE who will be with us on Thursday. Yet there's 12 of these folks who are also deep diving into catalytic thinking, and they're bringing it into their meetings, the shared common language. They're unpacking it and modeling it to other people. It's igniting in a workplace system that is definitely an area of focus for us with our education programs, to be able to point to tangible results of what happens when people are learning together in the same workplace.
It almost seems catalytic.
Interesting, Dimitri.
and truly, I mean, joking aside, catalyzing doesn't require, and tipping points don't require 50%. They require 10% to ignite. A match, when all the kindling is in place, it just takes one match. And there's 200 people on staff at the Department of Education, and 12 of them right now are in classes. Deep dive immersion, 3 months, once a week, 3 hours a week plus homework. That's a really nice percentage, considering that I would say another dozen throughout various state departments have taken classes in the past year. And so getting that sort of critical mass of just that match to put that kindling in, that's really exciting. Anything else that stood out? Yes, Shiva.
I'd like to comment as to where you and Dimitri are. When I first contacted you guys back like 2.5, 3 years ago, where you were as creators of this work was a different place than where you are now. And the fact that you are now eagerly taking this idea, this approach on the road, talks to where you are, and where you go, this organization, or what we call it, follows. So the fact that you are there speaks to me as tremendous growth.
Well, and the reason that resonates with me so much, Shiva, is because it is the fact that we can be there. Mm-hmm. That Rebecca's running all of our education programs. Mm-hmm. And 3 years ago, I was running everything. Right. And the fact that we have so many of the pieces in place that are allowing us to springboard, if I were to take an awesome out of all of this, it's the fact that you and Anne have so aggressively been working with us to build out to the next stage, which we're going to talk about after this. But, we've gotten as far as we can get with the support that we currently have. Right. And unless we decided to just full-blown go into this as, quote, a business where everything is earned income and everything has to come from doing the work to do it, finding partners who believe in what we're doing and want to play along, want to learn alongside us, not, as board members have heard us talking about for years, and as we've talked about as a board for years, walking that talk, that fine line of when we're talking about wanting to see an equitable world, do we want to step into the immense inequity in the power dynamics of financial relationships where we're begging for funding? And so being able to be at a point where we're ready to, and having you and Anne and others who have been saying, yeah, we want to make this thing build out. We want to make it scale. We want this to go where it can go. And we'll start introducing and we'll start having this conversation to make it happen, which is a big part of why we're out on the road to talk to folks about it. So it's beautiful to have the pieces in place. And I'll just be really, really honest. We would not be where we are if it wasn't for Rebecca, period. We wouldn't be where we are if it wasn't for Rebecca. Rebecca stepping in to work side by side with me over the past couple of years is why we are where we are. I owe you the biggest, we all owe you the biggest debt, Ms. Hurd. Yeah. Yeah. Anything else that stood out to you that or something that you might have had questions about in the stuff that we're doing right now?
Oh, just to build on that, I was excited to see figuring out the financial side of all this and how we can sustain it. I think that's been an ongoing, part of how we build the capacity and continue it. And so I'm excited to hear more about that or talk more about that as well.
Oh yeah. Yep. Yeah, and it has been interesting. The next white paper I write after the one that you guys received on the structure is going to be sort of the treatise on where we've been and why we've chosen that path financially. Reading a really fascinating book right now called Winners Take All. And if you haven't heard of it, it is a scathing indictment of where philanthropy has gone in the place of it's not about social enterprise, it's about the social enterprise mantra. Mm-hmm. Of doing good so that you can be rich. The doing well by doing good. And it is a scathing indictment of the tech folks making lots of money and choosing what the future is that they are going to create, which is, you know, awesome. The robber barons did it. It is an awesome thing. But when it supplants and replaces real democratized government, saying this is, as a people, where we want to go, that what he's talking about is the undemocratization, if that's a word, of social good. And so, you know, to be able to say we did not want to walk into that, and what it meant was that as founders, we self-funded. And there's only so far you can get with that, but we've gotten remarkably far. What we have done, and I love, Carl, you're pointing out the 600 consultants in the group, what we've done is a proof of concept. And I don't think you could prove any more that this works.
And it is, you know, it's entrepreneurial in a more of a classic sense that, you know, we, you talk about self-funded, you know, we chose to make certain sacrifices in order to have this happen, so that it was consistent with our philosophy and with our thinking and what we were trying to accomplish, as you know, as opposed to, you know, the growth of the organization wasn't the primary point here. It was the growth of the concept and its impact and what it can become. And so it sometimes reminds me of the, you know, when people say, wow, they came out of nowhere. No, we didn't come out of nowhere. You know, we've been doing this for 20 years. It's just now, you know, it's sort of like the flower is opening and people could see it and say, wow, this is really amazing. This is really wonderful. And hopefully there are people out there who are intrigued enough to say, I want to see this go to the next level, whatever that means.
One thing I was reflecting on that is not necessarily in the status update yet, it's real amazing work has been done, is there's been such an investment in planning conversations beyond what's even in there. Like I think of when we talk not only proof of concept, but we have spent days whiteboarding and months of convening around various topics to say, we've got things to show, not to say, here's our idea and we want to sell it to you. For example, the highest potential of a highly networked platform that is our mission in action. We've spent hours with Troy guiding us through all that and have documentation to share that we have been thinking deeply about all of these different areas. And it speaks to that blast off, that phase 2 that we're at in every part of moving our mission forward as this global experiment. So when people say, well, have you thought about it? We're like, well, yes, we love your wisdom. And here, let's show you pages and pages and videos of meetings and thoughtful conversations with wonderful people from around the world.
I also, just to comment on this, the whole story, the idea of collecting and being able to access the stories, we're really at the very beginning of that. And, you know, Rachel, you had such a great story. It's a perfect example of people everywhere who say, oh, I just changed a few questions and all of a sudden the meeting was completely different. People were less excited. We continually run into people who say, I read this or I was part of this like 5 years ago. It completely changed my life. And we never even knew who they were, never even heard of them until 5 years later, when this has been a new way of being, a new way of thinking, whatever. So we know the power that this has. And if we can and will document those stories, you know, the testimonials basically, and where people can be encouraged to do this, that it is possible. Look, that organization was just like my organization, or that person was just like me encountering that. So that was one of the things that when I was looking at this really jumps out at me as a big opportunity that we're just on the edge of.
Yeah, it's very exciting. It's one of the reasons that I'm so excited about the conversations that we're just at the beginning of having with Angie about our NOVA. The thought, you know, it would be wonderful if something could happen, because the thought of being able to document in a way that actually creates what would be considered evidence. You know, there's stories that we consider evidence, but in the real world of people who are looking for what is considered evidence-based, the ability to work with folks who are in the business of creating that kind of evidence, that's really exciting. That's taking things to the next level. So.
Yeah, I was thinking about this as like having nodes of leverage. This group, or and talk about getting like the orthodoxy of the field. The many people in our NOVA are studying they're writing the textbooks and that are be used in all of our classes. So if we can somehow bring them along to having these discussions, I think it could have a lot of other effects.
It is an exciting place to be at. Any other observations before we dive into talking about the restructuring?
Sorry, I have one follow-up just to that line of thinking, because I hear us talk about new ways of thinking, which I think really we're enabling and giving people permission to a way of thinking much more than it being new. I mean, if it were so new, people would stumble on it. I think the fact that people can take it up so quickly really speaks to, it's not a new idea, it's just we don't feel we have permission or are enabled to think in that way. And I think Rachel, just as you were sharing of like, oh, it's okay for me to believe this, it's okay for me to do this, is really, I think that's important, because it tempers it. It's like, no, this isn't something new. We're just giving you scaffolding and permission to do that. And the other thing that I'm actually struggling a little bit is the idea of evidence-based, because it's really emotional-based. Like all the research is shown, I mean, we have all the evidence for proof of anything out there in the world, but we don't choose to do it. And I think a lot of what's at the root of catalytic thinking is actually validating the emotional base, and to be values-oriented, to believe that you can do something is much of what it's, because the evidence, like I said, there is evidence for lots of things we should be doing that we don't do. Mm-hmm. So it's not just showing, yes, this works, but it's showing that we're enabling the valuing of belief and emotion as actually the thing that drives people to behave, to decide, to actually take action. And we know the climate is changing, yet many people's emotions and beliefs are preventing action. We don't need evidence for it anymore. We need emotion for it.
Yep.
So sorry, I know. Carl, that was an honor of you of how I go off sometimes.
No, Justin, but on the contrary, what it speaks to is, again, the meeting people where they are. Because there are the people, it's sort of at the innovation curve. The people who are in the early adopter phase are absolutely going to grab on to what you're saying in terms of, okay, this makes absolute sense. The people who are in that, show me, this is my day-to-day work. The beautiful book, I can't remember the author's name, Crossing the Chasm, where you move from early adopter to things being actually accepted as the norm. And those are the people who need to see, how is this applicable in my workplace? And the unfortunate reality of so many workplaces, especially if they are government funded, is that the powers that be frequently want to see what they consider evidence. And so the exciting thing to me is the ability to meet people where they are, in that we're doing both at the same time. There is a Sharing Stories initiative that has been up and running this year that we've gone through many. We're about to post all of those meetings. We've gone through many discussions about what does it make possible, and for whom, to share the stories of what works in people's lives in just as simple a manner as Rachel, you shared yours, and Rebecca so frequently shares stories of what happened in her neighborhood, or what happened with her husband, or what happened in the community. Those are immensely powerful, and what we're talking about is putting the pieces in place so that we can share those stories, that anybody can access them. I want to know what to do with my 15-year-old. Okay, click here. And if we could solve that, we could solve everything.
I just thinking about when mine were 3 years old.
Yeah, I want the button for that. But then there's also the people who are exactly. But then there's also the people who are working in a government office that is government funded, that only can do stuff that's quote evidence based, and they decide what evidence is. And so I really am excited about our ability to do both.
Mm-hmm. And I agree with you, Justin, that there's evidence out there for many values-based and reality-based, whatever they, from the environment to whatever. And there's different ways that people feel either justified or participant in that. And I think that some people need to have a title around it, that this is the best X of Y, and wherever that comes from, and whether it is or not, if enough people believe it is, then that's what becomes the reality. And so,
at the risk of sounding redundant, I would say that Created in Future is now threading that fine line between existing systems and this new way of looking at it. So systems require evidence, because nobody's going to do anything. But you're also talking to the people in the community. So here we are again. You have to provide what the systems need, because unfortunately we find ourselves in those systems. And yet your other target is the people. So.
Yeah. And getting to the point that you made, Justin, about this isn't new. One of the really fun things when I am speaking, when I'm doing a talk, doing a keynote, is I generally close by saying that when I finish a keynote and people come up to talk to me afterwards, someone will say, I am a Christian, and what you're talking about deeply resonates with everything in my faith. And I say, yes, I know. And then someone else will come up to me and say, I'm a Buddhist, and what you're talking about deeply resonates with everything in my faith. And I'll say, yes, I know. And somebody else will come up to me and say, I practice appreciative inquiry, and what you're talking about resonates with appreciative inquiry. And I'll say, yes. And then basically what it comes down to is we know what works. We know what brings out the best in people. And we know that people will rise to the level of what we expect of them. And if we expect the best of them, that's what they rise to. We just don't do it. And so what, to your point, Justin, we know what works. We just don't do it. And we certainly have not created our systems around that. And that's why it is so important, as you noted, Shiva, that Creating the Future is around systems change. What does it take to change those systems so that they are rooted in what we know works to bring out the best in people? So exciting stuff, and exciting to have this conversation about it, which I think leads directly into the excitement of the culmination of 3 years of our board discussions. And Justin and I have spent a good chunk of this year in conversation about the logistics of what it will take to flip the switch. And again, I'm going to ask for reflections and observations around both what was presented in the draft of the white paper, and just I think that by next time we will be able to have the conversation about logistics. What do we want to do, and what will it take to move forward? What are the first steps we want to take in moving forward? But I think for right now, because it's been a long time, and because so much has happened in the interim with this specific project, thinking about the change that we have been talking about over the past couple of years. What is striking to you? What is standing out to you? What are questions? What are ahas? Justin, if you have any observations, having been part of the conversations, that might be a place for us to start.
Sure. I think a lot of it comes back to the questions that we've been asking both in this setting, and I know some of us have been asking in our own practices of, what does it really mean to be a board member? You know, because again, it does go back to when we talked about recruiting people, and we kept asking that question: recruiting to do what? And I think the you know, when you start applying catalytic thinking to that question, you begin to realize that boards are a system that was not constructed to actually accomplish anything very effectively. And the persistent failure of them, the fact, you know, so for me, the fact that we have to keep training people to do this and they're still not good at it speaks to the fact that there's something wrong. It's not natural, it's not beneficial, and perhaps not necessary. You know, because oftentimes if, you know, I think even going back to Rachel, the experience you shared, if something is a big enough problem, we will problem solve it. We will come up with a solution that will be effective at solving the problem. It may not advance more aspirational goals, but it will solve the problem. We haven't even done that with boards. It hasn't been, you know, so it sort of raises the question, well, what do we need this thing for? If there isn't a gaping hole of something's failing because they seem to be failing, then let's ask the question of what were those things that it was supposed to try and advance, and where best would those live? And so I think that was what culminated a lot in the sort of minimum viable board question, which was, you know, if there are things that we want a board to accomplish, what are those benefits to the organization? And honestly, where do those best lie? Who's best in position to be able to contribute that? You know, Carl's talked about, you know, sort of the advising, but not advising, just the thinking, the sort of, it's almost like, you know, the board masticates ideas and then we don't even know what to do with it then. It just sort of, you know, and that's not a bad thing. You need an entity that's going to engage in that, but that's not necessarily a construct of what we talk about as a board. And so I think it's really was going down to basics and saying, what are the compliance issues that need to be met? Mm-hmm. How do we meet those? And then everything that is asset or benefit oriented, meaning an additive value to the organization, we find the appropriate home for that. There's nothing legally that requires it to live in a board. Your board does not need to fundraise. If they are not good fundraisers, that's actually kind of stupid. It's a poor investment. If they can't raise money, why are we investing money and asking them to raise money as opposed to finding a body that's really good at fundraising and investing in doing that? If they're not good at understanding what solutions and what conditions are required to strengthen a community, we shouldn't be asking them to set strategy. They're not in a position to do that. Let's find the group that does it. There's no legal obligation that they have to be the body that does that. And again, I think the culminating reality that they're not really doing it anyways. They're not doing it effectively. The real, you know, that's a very broad, I mean, you know, I would say on the whole, we're not doing it well. It doesn't mean that individual boards or individual people aren't incredibly additive and beneficial to an organization, but the structure doesn't naturally produce that. So I guess that's what I would put as context around where it is. And sort of, so that first stage is, let's put the minimal viable to make sure that the compliance happens in place, and then use the strengths of catalytic thinking to build out the other assets that need to be in place in line with the networked model, not a board governance model.
It was so fascinating when and I'm so pleased that we didn't rush this. I'm so pleased that we really took almost an entire year looking back to talk about what our values looked like in action in different ways, different issues coming up in different, and the ability to not rush, I'm feeling very grateful for, because what came out of that is it moved from, you know, I love the fact that this came out of the conversation about we need to recruit more board members, became what are we recruiting them to, and eventually became, is this even a structure of organization that makes any sense? And the more we asked the questions, the more it gave us the opportunity to experiment and say, what does make sense? And are we doing this just because we do it? And I have to say, one of the highlights of 2018 so far has been Justin and me talking with our attorney. And
how often does someone say that?
Exactly. So Ellis, you're part of my awesome for the year. We had this delightful conversation with our attorney, and we laid out everything that is in the white paper and everything that we're thinking about, and wanted to know from a legal standpoint, is this okay? And we had a great conversation, and two observations. One, at the end of our conversation, where we were about to wrap up, Justin asked Ellis, is there anything in what we've been talking about that scares you? And she didn't miss a beat. She said, no, there's nothing that scares me. And I think that if more of my clients did what you're about to do, they wouldn't need me. That it would solve a lot of the issues that come up when, to your point, Justin, people who aren't skilled, practiced, taught, etc., to do X wind up being told you have to do X, which is like the direct line to calling your attorney. Call your attorney now, because they're going to mess up. So yeah, one of my favorites in our olden days when we used to consult was when boards would talk about forming an HR committee or a personnel committee. And I would ask them, how many of you would feel comfortable standing in front of a judge and defending your knowledge of human resource practice? And none. So why are you doing this? and so yeah, I'm appreciative of that. What else? What stood out to you all as you read, as you think about this, as we start talking next time about what are we going to do, flip the switch, move on to next steps? I will tell you one of the interesting things that's not in the paper. And that is that aside from the legal structure, the funding, the infrastructure that we want to see at the core of this hub of hubs of hubs of hubs, Creating the Future has been operating like this for about 2 years. So in terms of autonomous, do a project, go do it, what can we do to support you? That whole sense of being networked and having the authority and the power to make decisions. That's how we've been operating over the past couple of years. So it just feels like we're stepping into something that we're already practicing. What else stood out to you guys?
I think for me, I worked a long time in social justice in the Catholic Church, and one of the most impactful organizations was the DART network, which is a network of community organizations, and they're organized rather similarly to this, and it was so powerful because each local hub, similar to what you're using, could get resources from the national network in terms of training coordinators and training leaders. And so they were able to amplify their impact at a much quicker rate than they could do if they'd had everything centralized. So that really jumped out at me here, that this seems like a logical next step if we're to really see that flower open fully.
Wonderful. It's a great example. Thank you. Carl, yes.
Yep. So, well, actually, you just triggered something in my head then when you were talking about standing in front of a judge, Hildy, and in terms of sort of the board and whether or not the boards have the skills to do things that we've charged them with. And I absolutely sort of get where we're coming from in terms of this concept of the minimum viable board, but I guess the questions that it raises in my head that I think you might have to be ready for someone else. The first would be: are you unintentionally encouraging a sort of a professionalization of the sector by almost sort of saying to trustees, you weren't geared up to do these sorts of things, so you have to rely upon professionals to discharge what you do? So hold that one for a moment, because if you don't have those HR skills on your board, you know, it sort of says, well, you have to rely on professionals more for them, perhaps. Next, so reading the paper, one of the things that I really liked, and you know, I mean, quite often it's these small things, isn't it, that sort of switch that light bulb on in your head. But you're on page 7, your use of the -1 and the +1 as a way of illustrating the point about when you're sort of trying to stop something from happening, or it gets you back to a stasis. That really resonates for me at the moment, and to give you an illustration of that, some of you will know that in the UK we have made the decision to leave the European Union.
We did not know that.
Best years of my life as a public policy person have been consumed by this already. And a number of people are saying that we should have a second vote, because essentially they want to reverse what happened before. But all the conversation at the moment is about we should have a second vote, and all the energy and so on is about let's give us a chance to sort of have a second vote and revert to what we had before. And nobody is offering a vision of what a different or a better future would look like. So as a result, they're not going to win this argument, I think, for a second vote, because nobody has that positive vision of the future. So again, maybe coming back to the things that Justin was saying before about evidence and how people feel and so on, I sort of just have a sort of a sense at the minute that what we really need from social change organizations more than ever is a sort of a positive vision of the future. I just think that's missing from so much of public policy at the moment, and that positive vision of the future combined with a real sense that I can do something practical. And the obvious sort of example, and a bit of a cliche here, is climate change. I mean, that sort of sense that actually, you know, after the Paris Agreement and so on, we can actually do something, and then that sense that individually we can actually take actions that cumulatively will make a difference. And I really like, we've got to keep pushing at that. What comes out of here is that sort of sense that individually we can take action, and cumulatively those lots of 1% add up to a very large percentage in terms of change. So I sort of liked that. The other thing that I sort of guess I liked as well is that as a thesis, it sort of comes together in terms of when you think about the building blocks of what you're sort of trying to explain. So I thought that was really good. The thing that about network of networks, and this again was relevant to me because what I was saying before about NCVO, because originally when NCVO was set up, it was as a network of networks. We didn't have individual organizations as members. We just had other member organizations that themselves had members. So that made lots of sense to me. But I guess the question I'd sort of think about, and maybe it's just because of where I am in terms of thinking about digital over the last year and those big behemoths that Angie was talking about before, and sort of their habits and sort of practices. And I guess I just think more than ever that actually face-to-face is important. And it's your point about the tour sort of going out. And it's not enough to have, if in sort of taking this forward, it's not enough just to have digital networks of people to come together. There's something really important about the physical and about physical spaces for people to come together and talk about the good society. And I think in as much as this can be a movement in the future, I mean, if there's a long-term vision, it's also about how do we physically bring people together in those hubs, even if the core or the center is digital. Sorry, that was a bit of a long-winded.
No, I think it's perfect and spot on, and makes me smile, because the networks can be anywhere. They can be online, they can be in real life, they can be in a huge location, they can be in your home. I love what you're talking about, because it is the reality. I'm sure I have shared with you guys, somebody told me a long time ago, when online was first a thing. And I'm old enough that there was a time where we had phones with cords, and they were on the wall, and you stood next to the wall. Somebody told me a long time ago, in the beginning of this era, that regardless, eventually it comes down to the fact that we human beings are animals, and eventually we need to smell each other. And I just, that has always stuck with me. So I don't know if that's exactly what you had in mind, Carl, but
I think the physical part of it too speaks to that collective enoughness, because the problems can seem so big. And when we connect digitally, yes, even now we're having a meeting and we're all together, but we can't touch each other and just hug each other and hold each other close. And so that sense of intimacy that you get when people are in the same room, I think is an important dynamic to that, because it speaks to collective enoughness in a very tangible way.
Very much, yeah. Very, very much. Yeah, Justin.
So I'd like to go back to Carl's question about the professionalization. And I think this is probably something that could use some more input or some more thinking in the white paper. So, so what we have now, in my opinion, Carl, is we have a professional classification, which is boards are designed for the professional class. And so, and what we do is, by having constructed that, we get people who are smartest people in the room, but might not know how to do what they're doing. And so I think, to Shiva's point, which is, what are we doing to bring this back down to community? So I think I think we need to address what Carl's saying, which is, what we're not advocating for is the professionalizing of these things, except where that is needed. You need an attorney to do the legal analysis, but you don't need an attorney to validate the efficacy of a program in a community. You need a community member to do that. And the professional is the community member, not the lifelong CEO of a movement building network. But you actually need the person on the ground that's there. So I think if we give some thought to one, I think the classifying that has already happened, that boards in the United States in particular, and so Carl, this experience might be a little differently internationally, but in the United States, it's basically, we look for professionals to be on our boards. That's what we do. But they are not professionals in the field of expertise that we need them to practice in. But some of those fields are not actually professional fields. They are community fields. And so I think I think we just need to pull that forward and say, some of these things, like strategy, like values, like vision, like mission, actually need to come from the community and those who this work is about. The technical skills do need to be handled by technocratic people, because that's what we want. We want and I think what we need to speak to is, and this I think is a lot of what we try to do with Creating the Futures, and we try and do with the bylaws, is they impose upon the system a level of inquiry that buffers that from happening, that basically says, no, the answer is not professionalization as we see it. It is a different understanding of what it means to bring the person with the experience, expertise, and professionalism of that domain to bear, and just being very careful, because again, as I'm talking about this, keeps popping into my head, the Gates Foundation and how they're just getting called out left, right, and center for being, for the smartest man in the room syndrome, which is, I know the answers, I'll fix it for you. And yes, we're going to design programs that are community oriented, but here's how you do it. and and they're getting called BS on it, which I think is great. So I think, Carl, you raise a really good point of like I'll stop. Carl's got something to add.
I didn't know that about the Gates Foundation. That's really interesting, and maybe outside of this, Justin, I'll follow up on that with you. I guess I would just reflect that I think the experience that you talked about in North America about professionalization of boards is absolutely something that's happening here, and in some respects we as a system are encouraging that, because the demands that we're placing on boards all the time, safeguarding is the latest sort of thing, and some moral panic about safeguarding practice in organizations as an example. The countervailing force, though, is that there's a big discussion in the UK at the moment about the role of lived experience in terms of shaping policy, just as in the same way, the analogy almost is in the digital world, they're trying to move towards this much more agile form of developing software and programs and projects and so on, actually based on people's lived experience rather than what some expert in the middle says is needed. So I guess the reason I'm saying all that is that not all organizations are going to be able to adopt this concept of the minimum viable board, but there are things that come out of this discussion about accountability and the nature of accountability that are absolutely relevant to those boards that might not change, and we shouldn't lose that.
Yeah. And in my mind, the importance is that we stop talking about boards and we start talking about, as Justin started out this conversation, we start looking at what is the most effective vehicle for accomplishing social missions. And if we look at that entire vehicle and we look at, I frequently use the analogy is that I don't run my family based on what the IRS says I can deduct in my mortgage. I mean, I run my family based on this is what's best for my family, and I want them to grow and be strong and be healthy, and I want us to have fun. And what we have allowed the tail to wag the dog here in terms of boards and organizational structure, and nobody talks about organizational structure. What we talk about is boards, and if we look at the reality that we legally have to have a board. Okay, so if we legally have to have a board and we look at the fact of in this society, and if the IRS came a-calling, the first thing they would ask is, where's your board? We have one. What are they accountable for? Making sure that we are compliant. That is a function we all need, but it's not the only function and it's not the biggest function. It is the fact that I paid my taxes so nobody's going to come take my house away is the same thing. I'm not living for that. No, I'm living to raise my family and have them be happy and healthy and et cetera. It's the same thing for us, that I see it as such a tiny component. And when we see it in the context of what is the best, most effective vehicle for propelling our mission forward. And oh, by the way, being legally compliant is part of that. And we have some folks that are doing that. To me, that is such a different question than what should a board do, what can a board do. It winds up back to the +1 and the -1 again. Are we trying to drag boards along so that they finally, dear God, please get to 0? Or are we actually looking at what is a vehicle that will allow communities to step into a +1 situation? And, we have the delicious mandate to experiment. And to be able to say a year from now, we found this worked better than this, and we went in this direction because of that, and documenting it so that we know our why, we know our own can build on it and others can. There's something really powerful on not looking at this through the lens of I have a hammer, and therefore everything in here looks like a board development strategy.
You know, when you were describing that, Justin, one of the things that frequently comes to my mind is that when you have this elite class that serves on boards, who are experts in whatever they're experts in, they are compelled to do something when they sit on a board. The do something may be to analyze the paperclip budget and to question why we spent $12 instead of $6 on buying paperclips. And I'm being extreme in the example, but we're humans and we're asked to sit here and be monitoring something. Well, we can only apply what we know to that. And what we know is I'm a financial person, or I'm a head of whatever, or I'm this, or I'm sitting on a board because I want to advance my career. Whatever it is that I am here, that it leads down paths that reinforce all of the bad stuff that has happened on boards forever. And we create the conditions that make that happen.
One of the things I loved in talking to the folks at Inspiral and speaking with Susan Basterfield, who's on the board of Inspiral, and I would love to have her be part of our upcoming conversations, is the fact that the board at Inspiral, I said, so who makes decisions? And she said, we all do. And to me, that was just because if a board is in charge of compliance, what they do at Inspiral, and I loved, is that if they have a decision that needs to be made, that then goes out to everybody. So it's not, we have a decision, we'll make that decision because we're the three people who understand compliance. It's no, this is a bigger thing that requires a decision. Everyone who is impacted will have a say in that decision. And that's why Inspiral developed a software platform for just that kind of decision making. But the thought that anything that's going to involve community involves community, and that the ones who, so who's going to decide the strategy? How about the people who are impacted by the strategy? Oh, wow, there's something new. And that's really exciting to me is who decides direction? The folks who need to decide direction, not me because I'm the founder and not because I was hit by a bus. So CEO number 3 is going to, that's really exciting to me is to share the decision making with the people who are actually going to be impacted by the decision. That's pretty awesome. And to have confidence because they will be using catalytic thinking to make those decisions. So it's not just going out and asking a whole bunch of people. We will have come to whatever we come to through the framework of asking questions that begins with number one, first and foremost, who is going to be impacted? First question, who's going to be impacted? And we listen to them. We use catalytic listening to listen to them and bring them into the conversation. And then the next thing we ask is the question that Carl was looking at, the vision question. Okay, so if this thing is no longer a problem, what will that make possible? Open up those floodgates to what are we really talking about? And if that's built into every decision, because that's how we do things, that becomes our culture, that becomes our systems. And we're making sure that all of the for whoms are addressed. We're no longer walking inadvertently that model of we do things to you.
So I'm not a lawyer, but I like to talk like one in these kinds of settings. In our sector, we talk about that standard of care, and it's defined as what would a normal person have done in the same situation. Well, guess what? When you have a bunch of people who are experiencing the same situation make the decision, you're meeting that standard of care becomes very easily justifiable, which was to say, Justin didn't know what a normal person would do in this situation. But gosh, we got 25 people together who are the people who this matters to and understand this. And they said this is what a normal, rational person would do in this situation. And that was the basis for the decision. I think that again, if we get at even some of those legal obligations of a duty of care, I think duty of loyalty is off the table, because the fewer people you have, the less you have to worry about loyalty.
And again, the question really becomes loyalty to whom and to what?
Yeah.
Because legally, the duty of care and loyalty is to the organization. Yeah. Now that's a crock of, so we had, that's, why do we have bazillions of organizations who constantly feel like they're on a hamster wheel and not able to accomplish anything? Well, possibly because the duty of care and loyalty are to the organization, not to the community, legally. And so if we can look at, there was a huge aha for me. I'm a writer, so I think as I write. And so much of this has been scribblings over the past couple of years where suddenly it comes out of my pen and I go, oh, wow, that's pretty good. But the thought that what we have devised is representative rather than direct. So, four board members represent all of the brilliance in a community of 2 million people. That makes a whole lot of sense. And if we are open in our decision making and casting a very broad net, we're skipping over that representative part. And we're actually asking the people who are being impacted. That got really exciting for me. That we've created a structure that, while it may not have been its initial intent, is so rooted in distrust. So let me give you like the distrust example is the CEO of a foundation going to his board. And you want to talk about the professionalization and the elite class. A foundation board is going to be that professionalized elite class. And the CEO of the foundation going to his board and saying, we want to adopt a more community engagement model for the way we are doing our philanthropy. And we want to go out to the community, and I always love out to. We won't have to go out to the community because the community will be included, but we want to go out to the community and ask them what they need and what they see as their reality. And one of the board members, and I am not making this up because I couldn't make this crap up, one of the board members said, what if we ask them and they're wrong? I mean, that's what we've developed in this representative crap. We don't need it. Mm-hmm. And especially now in times where we do have the technology where we can be both local and global, we don't need to be representatives of what other people think.
Years ago, we were working with a community health board. And because it was federally funded and the way they were structured, it required that there be a number, and it was a small number, of patients who actually received the service sit on the board. What was interesting was they so often deferred to the banker who knew nothing about, other than what the board, what the staff told him was going on, for their insights of how the organization was being run versus the person who was actually receiving the care, receiving the service. Because that's how the system was set up, that even though they were required to have some community members, in this particular case, the community was the patients, even though they were required to have some community members on the board, the potential that brought to the board was never fully actualized.
The other thing that's occurring to me as we're having this conversation is the fact that most boards do not, the composition of most boards does not represent the composition of the community that they're serving. And how many boards do we all know of that are working in communities of color, and it's a whole bunch of 50-year-old white people sitting on the board? if you are going directly to the people, you don't have to worry about having a green one and a purple one and whatever on the board. Is that board doesn't make decisions. The people who make the decisions are the people who are impacted. There's something exciting here, so I'll stop. And any other thoughts that this all raises for you as we because next time we're going to really talk about what are the logistics, what's next, bylaws, and how are we crafting them, and et cetera, and et cetera. But in terms of direction, how is this feeling? I'm going to ask each of you to just talk about direction, how this is feeling. And whoever wants to start, because I don't want to call on you. Don't make me call on you.
Hildy, before we get there, if I might share one quick thing. Years ago, I served on a board of, it was actually the only nonprofit I've ever been on the board of that I thought really embodied what we're talking about here. It's a social justice group, not surprisingly. And when our onboarding session happened as a new board member, both old and new had to come together for a retreat. And they brought somebody in there who talked about the difference between a board of directors and a board of trustees. And the talk all went around the nomenclature and the difference between a director and a trustee. A director implies more oversight, power over you, whereas when you're a trustee, it implies that something precious has been entrusted to you for your care. And so it totally reframed our whole role of thinking, and all of our practices of functioning as a board were on consensus decision making, and it took very little time to achieve consensus because of we had people from the community, those that were living with the decisions we make on the board. And so as we talk about the board and what you want to look like, what we want to look like going forward, it might be worth spending some time thinking about, do we want to build a board of directors or a board of trustees? Or do we want to have a board of directors with a network of trustees? I know it throws a wrinkle in it, but to me, just that one word difference made such a huge difference in our culture. And I think it was more impactful than anything else that they did in terms of teaching us.
Wow. Yeah. And then it becomes trustee of what, to whom. Yeah, it's beautiful. What all are you guys feeling about this direction?
Can I make a couple of very quick observations?
Can I stop you? I haven't been able to stop you in 20 years.
You just did.
A small snipey suggestion, top of page 13, aiming for +1. Can we find better language than +1? The reason being, I'm saying at the point that Google is shutting down its social network, the name of which I can't just remember, and the entire sort of nomenclature of that is, the entire nomenclature of Google Plus is +1. You might be associated with something that hasn't worked. And then my second observation is that I think the direction of travel is right. That the paper all the way through is a cogent argument for the direction of travel. And as an aside, and I meant to say this before, Hildy, I really liked section 2 about what has been tried, and I love that. And for me, I'd love to see that expanded as a standalone piece because it's really interesting. So, direction of travel, all fine. But I guess just sort of listening to the sort of the conversation, and given that we've talked about minimum viable board, it almost sort of the jump from all the articulation of the direction of travel, then the sudden jump to suddenly talk about the board jars a little bit, because it feels that we've suddenly come on to something that's very, very specific, that feels much narrower than the articulation that's gone all the way through the paper. So I think the direction of travel is right. I just sort of, to someone less involved than us, they might experience that jarring as well.
Appreciate that.
And it could be in the being more explicit about where responsibility is being shed. So we're acknowledging that the asset that the board was supposed to bring is still valid. The things that we talk about, strategy, resource development, engagement, ambassadorship, advocacy, compliance, flak jacket, all of those things are still necessary. Those are capacities that have to exist in the organization. That's part of that's part of the leadership capacity of the organization. And I think we talked about this before. Governance is not an action. It's not a verb. It's the result of something. You are well governed when X, Y, and Z are happening. And I think that that's part of, we have verbified governance. Like there's this body that's going to govern, which I think goes to Rachel's point, which is it means they're going to control, decide. And what we're saying is, no, we want to create a system of governance, or the results in entities that are well governed, meaning entities that use their resources effectively and efficiently to advance outcomes in the community. That's what it's about. And so, but I think to Carl's point that there is a point on the white paper that it feels like we're going from big thinking to now suddenly, oh, now we're just talking about the minimum viable board and what that is. And it might just be saying, when you start to move these other functional capacities out of what we call the board, what we end up with is this piece that's left that really is, I mean, I love what Rachel said about, really thinking about the semantics. It's an auditing entity. I mean, it's a compliance. It's a board of compliance. And the trustees, we have committees of trustees that are out there that are taking on the community engagement part, the efficacy of programming, the financial integrity, the human and bringing out the best in people, and so that we demonstrate that line of thinking, because I strongly believe if an organization asks the questions that catalytic thinking asks you to ask, and if we ask that fundamental question, are the resources being used effectively and efficiently to advance the community outcomes, you will be well governed. I mean, just asking the questions is going to raise things. It's going to, it's not, should we do this? It's, is that effective and efficient? Right. Is it evidence-based? Is it, to go, to contradict myself.
Just don't contradict Carl.
All the time. Isn't that really what this is about?
I think actually it's the only reason we get together.
Yeah, Carl, we had met like hours before strategizing how to.
Not to contradict Carl.
Carl and I exist to figure out how we can disagree on the thing we agree about the most.
You're doing very well as an outside observer. How is this direction feeling to you, Rebecca, Angie, Shiva?
I think the direction is good, and I wanted to say, as Carl's point about section 2, I also was very excited about, in part because I've done a lot of thinking and writing about the area, so maybe we could collaborate on something together. And then, but the hard part, it seems to me, which is what we're trying to do now, is okay, this is what's been happening. What's maybe a different way that can help us get to better outcomes or better solutions, or however you want to articulate that. That's the really hard part, I think, which I'm glad we're working on.
Yeah, I'm really glad we're getting to explore it.
Yes.
We're getting to explore it. How about you, Rebecca? How is this direction feeling to you?
It's feeling very good because it's been coming along for a while. And I think back to, it is creating a new structure that really holds space for whoever these individuals are around this, compliance or whatever legally, for rational thinking and decisions through the lens of catalytic thinking. Because so often board structures have not had any place for rational thought. There's been lots of fear-based, no context to the whole. I don't have any knowledge in this area. So the structure is creating conditions for success for whoever chooses to step into this, to know exactly what I'm stepping in, and that I'll be supported. And here's what all those supports look like.
Yeah, the word container popped into my mind as you were talking. That if the structure of this organization is a container that is holding the space for the vision, for the values, for the people. Yeah, I like that. Shiva, how about you? How's the direction feeling to you?
So obviously I'm at a disadvantage because I have not been part of these conversations and you guys have been talking about them for years. So I'm trying to put myself in the position of somebody who is not within the creating the future framework and understanding.
No, she froze.
No, but I think we will learn something from that.
What you said, Shiva, you froze.
I'm
You were talking about coming from the point of view of someone who is not within the organization, and then you froze and we didn't hear you. And she's frozen now. Oh. Well, oh, I am very disappointed. I am very disappointed. Rachel, any other additional thoughts that you have in terms of the direction that we're taking? Okay. Wonderful.
No, I think it really is a product of the thinking that went into it, which seems pretty corny to say, but when we ask questions about what's possible, I love the fluid nature of it because it's not a centralized hub and it just feels more democratic and more inclusive.
Yay. Well, next time we will begin talking about, okay, and the reason the focus on the board, and I like the conversation, Justin and Carl, that you had in terms of just a different way of framing that in the paper itself, because it's the first question people ask. Is so what about the board? Who's going to lead? Who's going to blah, 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 blah. So that's why it was in there, like the suggestions in terms of the context. What we'll be talking about next time is the nuts and the bolts of the first thing that has to happen, actually, is to create that board. Simultaneous to the work that Shiva and myself and Anne Vermel and a couple other people are doing to start finding foundations who want to partner with us, who want to learn alongside us and not just provide funds, but build this thing out function by function, the functions you were talking about, Justin, function by function, what will it look like as we build this out? But the first thing that we need to build out is to make sure absolutely that we're legally compliant. So making sure that we have a board, recruiting a board who wants to focus on that, who is in essence just in the audit committee, who wants to focus on compliance, and changing the bylaws so that for the first time in the history of this organization, the bylaws will actually reflect what we do.
I also have a comment.
Well, and we're going to go to reflections because we're at 5 minutes. And so I'd just like everyone to sort of take a deep breath. If you took any notes, take a look at the notes that you took. And let's just take a moment and reflect on what is standing out to you from all of the conversations today. What are you taking out of the meeting today? And I wish Sheila was here. And anyone who's feeling ready to share their reflection.
I probably used to say this all the time when we used to meet before, but God, it's good to be back. It's just a sort of a mind sort of bending couple of hours for me. It's a completely different way of thinking to everything else I do, and you know that's brilliant. But there's a real pragmatist inside me that's always fighting to sort of say we've got to be able to sort of make this very easily digestible and so on. And I think that's possibly what Shiva may well have been about to say. But it's really, really good to be back and to talk about these issues in a way that normally we just never talk about them. Even if we're wrong, doesn't matter. It's the fact that we're having the conversation. Well, as you say, it's that we're asking different questions. It's an experiment. You can't be wrong with an experiment. You just learn what works and what didn't. And I guess we all just get to guess what Shiva was going to say and say adamantly that that was in fact the truth. So I think what Shiva was going to say. Who else? What is standing out to you from our time together today?
I'm curious, Dimitri, what your thought was that was percolating for you.
That I jumped in and stopped him?
Yeah. My thought was that for the magnitude of the shift that we're talking about, the restructuring of boards, which is not new. The Inspiral and other boards, have been doing. Other organizations have been doing this, but the level of documentation of the thinking, of the conversation, and the accessibility of that creates a really, really powerful sales tool, for lack of a better word, to understand, to have others be able to understand this. The very questions that are being asked here today, that these questions were asked. We've been thinking about them, and you can see what others have thought about it. So it's already engaging in creating those trustee groups before it even happens. We are doing that right now so that people walking into this who are going to be a trustee or a board member or whatever we determine have this rich Wikipedia of knowledge that they could easily access to make this transition easy for them to not only accept, but to enthusiastically support.
Great.
I'm sorry, I need to get going to another meeting.
Yep. We all do.
Yeah. I wanted to say that I really appreciated having the chance to get together today, and yeah, we should keep doing it. And I'm excited for where things are going. And Hildy, I'll be in touch, or Sharik will be in touch soon to talk about further, doing some stuff.
Wonderful, wonderful.
It was great to see everyone. Sorry, I have to
we are all rushing off. Rachel, your observations, reflections?
I just want to thank you for the privilege of sitting in on this meeting. It's exciting to see that this level of leadership is there. It feels to me like you're giving us all permission to color outside the lines. And that's tremendously liberating. So thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. Rebecca, how about you? Your reflections as we head out?
It's coming, riffing off of lots of folks noticing, I think in the middle part, the normalization to many people in the world and the sense of hope to see these are the systems. These are the systems you may have not even realized you're showing up in that are not bringing out the best, and the assumptions that have gone into you being a part of the board or recruiting for board. So I think that sense of, Carl spoke about, we need a positive vision for the future. And a huge piece of that for some folks who are feeling so stuck and frustrated is just the normalizing of here's what's really going on, people.
Yeah, wonderful, thank you. Justin, how about you, your reflection?
So something popped into my head around boards have been this dumping ground for organizational capacity. That's what they've been. And I think what we're talking about and some of what Carl talked about is the challenge with this is we are now being called the question of what does it take to build structure for those capacities in a really good way. If we need You know, and again, I'll use fundraising just because it's so,
It's an easy one.
you know, it comes up so much. It's like, if we need effective fundraising capacity, what does that structure actually look like? So rather than the board being this dumping ground of all the capacities we didn't have people to take care of, or it was just easy to dump in there because they're the responsible party, we're basically pulling that all out now and saying, no, the specific capacities, where best would they live? And so, yeah, just sort of, you know, I keep thinking about sort of these ways of describing the just the bizarre anomaly that a board is and what we put on them. And so, you know, this idea of it being the capacity dumping ground. And yeah, it's hard to then think about where would you put this capacity if you were to put it somewhere else. But,
are you talking community capacity, Justin?
I mean, everything. I mean, it's like, so if we think about, you know, strategic planning capacity, if we think about fundraising capacity, if we think about, you know, ambassadorship capacity, all these things that we say an organization needs, it kind of seems like, well, if we don't have it in staff, we just assign it and dump it to the board. Or if it seems important, we should put it in the board bucket. And so it's just like this catch-all for all capacities. And that's why it doesn't work, because it's a hodgepodge. Doesn't make sense. So.
Well, my reflection is similar to Carl's, is that I love our meetings. It's fun. You know, I will never, ever, ever forget, Carl, years ago, you saying, our board meetings are my me time. You know, what board gets to say that? And I love that. So I will look forward to, we'll get together another time that works for everybody, and we will see you guys in a month, and we'll talk about what it will take to actually get this puppy rolling. And deep gratitude to all of you. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.